Thank you very much. Actually, I have just 20 minutes, so I have to rush. I'm going to talk about a project, and I'm not going to refer to the Bahamas at all. I'm not going to refer about innovation here, but through that case study, we are going to refer to several of the things that were discussed this morning. So this is a large research project we have with Qatar Foundation. Just to put it in perspective, it's about $1.5 million per year. It's going to last 4 years, and we are at the first 6 months. And I'm going to present to you a few about those things that we're doing. So Qatar is interested not only in Qatar, that you see somewhere here, actually this is where it is, but it's interested in the entire area of the Gulf, the Persian Gulf, and we see the sea as a connecting element. I have to say that this is the way I see the sea, is I see it always as the opportunity to reach on the other end, as opposed to when I see the mountains, I see them as barriers. I assume that this is the way you look at things at in the Bahamas as well. So we are studying all these 9 cities that you see around the Gulf, and we try to understand what is similar and what is different. It's a big team. I just happen to be here, part of the core group that I direct, but I want to make sure here that you understand that the sponsor has several people, but I would like to specifically point out to you the regional delegates and consultants, and we have people from the area who are very, very much active in this research, just referring to some of the questions that were asked this morning, because simply we cannot go to Qatar and do the research ourselves. We need to have very good ground. However, we are equally demanding from the people there, and they have to contribute. At the same time, let me also point another thing. We have Harvard faculty advisors. Harvard is not only the School of Design, we have access to the other schools, and that makes us to be rich in our research, and we have people from sociology, anthropology, public health, government, and so on. So the way we look at the area is that we study the region, and we study the region from 3 different perspectives: urban form and architecture, environment and public health, and socio-cultural and economics. The first year is the past, so we start understanding what happened there before oil changed the economy. The second year, it's going to be the present, and years 3 and 4 is going to be about the future. This is something I want to actually emphasize here as well. If you're going to do systematic research, it's always good to look at the past in a similar manner like what we saw in the Perry Institute earlier, and understand the built environment and how people lived for a long time, instead of jumping directly to answers. So this is our timeline starting from February 2011. This is our photograph in Qatar, and these are the different things as they have happened in the months, and this is a very systematic process. In very many ways, it's like professional work. It is professional work, but like offices. And here you see our first workshop in Doha, and here is how we continue, and we are right now here in June, and we proceed and we study the different cities and so on. What are the goals? Why are we doing this research? Let me talk for the Qataris. The Qataris are concerned that the way the cities are being built today are not sustainable. Right now they have a lot of money and cheap energy, but they're concerned what is going to happen later. So the real question we're asking is how cities should be developed to be sustainable. And we look at the past in order to understand what was sustainability at that time and what we can learn from the past. And this is actually how their cities are being developed. Cities used to develop in a different way. There were totally different scales of associations and socio-economic issues. Let you look here at the historic center of Dubai and see what happens right now. And this circle that you see here is the small red circle you see there. The growth is really big and causes serious problems. We look at sustainability. I used the term earlier that sustainability is about survival. Sustainability at that time, it was how they could survive in the very harsh environment, economic and environmental problems they faced at that time. I think we come back to the same issue. This is how we look at survival. There was the oil economy, economic prosperity, the new economy, and now we're looking about the new survival. the hypothesis here. We start from external factors, and through processes we look at the built environment. Our specialty is the built environment, but we want to understand how this built environment was developed through those things. And I'm not going to read all the slides. I'm going to give the presentation if you want to go later. I have too many slides to be able to stop on each one of them. But here we look at the environment, public health, socio-cultural economics, how they influence the built environment. By built environment, I don't mean only buildings. A built environment is constructed landscapes as well, the way we look at the School of Design. And then how the built environment feedbacks and influences the economy and the local society. And culture plays a very important issue here, culture and religion. So what is our methodology? We're going to develop a series of books that's going to be at the unit level, which is the house or the single open space, all the way to the neighborhood cluster, all the way to the town, all the way to the region. And eventually we're going to have an electronic version of the whole thing with keywords, and here we show how this electronic version is going to be available on the web. How we organize the fields of study, as we said before: urban form architecture, environmental studies, socio-cultural, these are the columns, the individual, then the unit is the house, then the smaller neighborhood, then the city, the region, and the mega region. And eventually, out of all these things, we look at sustainability in historic and traditional terms. Remember, this is about the past, and sustainability for us is not only environmental. Actually, environmental was a minor concern at that time. It was mostly socio-economic. Our first findings. I'm going to go rather quickly here. We look at the overall area, the environment, and then we notice that the temperature is rising. No question about it. We notice that precipitation is getting less. The ecosystems, they changes in sea level, temperature, salinity, increased desertification, and then how this affects the built infrastructure. We have to deal with temperature rise, with extreme heat, with changes in sea level and salinity. We have to deal with those issues. In the past, we were constrained by nature. In the present, we design without nature. Actually, this is the major criticism. In the future, we expect to design sustainability with nature, understanding nature. Things were referred this morning about these things. We look at archaeology, historiography, trade routes, 1500s, and then we go back and look why the cities were developed where they developed. There was a reason for that. It was primarily for trade. And then we come to the point that the regionally available resources do not match the required resources for a city. In other words, in simple terms, these cities were developed there for specific purposes, like pearl diving. Now it is for oil, but it was not possible to be sustainable because the resources were not enough. We accept that, and we have to accept it. This is what Patrick was saying earlier, that you cannot apply lead directly there. You cannot apply the existing norms that we developed for North America. And eventually, we look at the key resources, and we start looking on how these regionally available resources are going to go to the key resource and the required resource for the city, and eventually we develop a whole model on how the economy worked and how houses were developed. Then we start putting for every city what are the main issues, but trade, sailing, and exchange were fundamental in the development of that economy. Then we look at privacy and the way the houses have been built, and we look at the environment. And here we work with 4 aerial photos that they are available on those years and only 1 topographic map. Very little information available. And based on that, we start developing how the city was developed. So this is, you see the research results. You see this is the main fort, and this is how the city develops. And we do the urban economic analysis, and then we start looking at how Doha, the center of Qatar, is growing, and how it's growing, and we're using GIS and densities. And eventually, we start looking at the old network of cities, looking at the old aerial photographs, and the new developments, and eventually we start recording the neighborhoods according to the Islamic way of neighborhoods being developed. Then the plots, one by one, by just looking at the aerial photographs. This is a lot of work there, tracing and understanding what's going on. And eventually the mosques and where the mosques are. and eventually the historic houses, recorded the historic houses with information for each one of them, and recorded wells. Again, water, major issue. They were getting it from wells. And here we continue actually with the cemeteries, where the cemeteries were, and all these are being put on GIS maps. And eventually, this is quite interesting, we assume the population 52 was 20,660 people. We did that by simply measuring the number of units. When we presented this to the Qataris, they said, it's so accurate, we can't believe you got it. And I have to say this, not so much that it was accurate, but you can see in 52, that was a very small village, because this is what could be afforded there. What we see that's being developed is a result of overgrowth of the economy heated by oil and gas for Qatar. Then here we see some, we start studying some neighborhoods, and then we continue trying to understand distances from the plots and how many people lived and so on. And here we see the density of how much has been built. You see the white is unbuilt and black is built. And then we continue and we start looking for another ridge. And these are the streets, the main streets. Actually, most of them are dead ends. And then we continue and we start seeing later how much more is being built. There is an infill. Actually, we have to learn from the infill instead of sprawling. And then this is the density of the sizes of the different plots, that they start from 57 square meters all the way to 1,300. And we continue here with the clusters. And then we continue with the size of building entities. And we continue analyzing the neighborhoods, and then the streets in 3D, and then we start looking at the shading in the winter, in the summer, and then we start taking individual houses, tracing individual houses first on paper, then we make the models, and then we make an ID for every house, like what we see here. This is an ID card of the house, and then the houses are being built in 3D models. We study how sunlight goes into the rooms. The problem there is too strong sunlight. And then we start looking at the different spaces with the courtyard and how the houses are being expanded. So this particular house starts with these very few places, and then they start building more as the family increases. And then we continue here and we start looking at the house and start measuring. And here we see how during the day the shading occurs and what is the effect of the courtyard. And I continue here looking at the buildings. Actually, here we do an analysis of the openings depending on the direction of the wall, just taking into account the environmentals. And more, actually, this is again using some simulation programs for environmental analysis. And here we start studying what is the effect of the gallery in the courtyard, and then the different rooms, and more. And this is the temperature. The outside temperature is the green one, and this is the temperature of every room being simulated. We find out actually that they were doing an excellent job in designing their houses given the very difficult climate they had. Excellent job. And here it is the mean air temperature in July, and then we start seeing how it is in a cool day, and you see how the cool day goes like this with about 12 degrees, 10 degrees, and you see how the rooms keep the temperature, that they pick it up during the day and they keep it during the night as well. And then we start doing some very interesting experiments. We start saying, what happens, this is the existing situation, this is what you need for heating, this is for cooling, and then we start doing several things like removing the gallery, adding insulation, removing insulation, and we find out that the very best is what they were doing. In other words, if you were putting more insulation on the roof, that would trap the heat in and would require more cooling capacity. So I want to emphasize that no matter what you do for the EXUMAS, with us or with someone else, make sure you appreciate and you study very carefully what people have done throughout the centuries. They knew more than sometimes we want to accept. And here is, you see similar things. So the existing situation was by far we found it to be the most, the best. And then here we start doing some parametric analysis to categorize the different houses, and we start looking at different analysis. Our models are not to be just beautiful architectural models. Our models is to understand the different components that make the houses. And then I continue here and we start looking at what is the windows as a percentage of the surface in the different walls, in the different orientations. And then what is the daylight factor, the windows over wall surface, the windows over floor area, all kinds of ways to understand the way they were designing their houses. And here we start creating a database that all the information from a single house goes there, and the collection of the houses gives us aggregate results. And eventually, this is how we process the parametric analysis. And at the same time, we start looking at some architectural models. This is a very interesting house. And we start making very detailed analysis. So this is for, as part of the research for documentation. And here you see the house in more detail exploded. So we can see the different areas. We use this also for other analysis. I don't want to go through all these things now. And of course, as I told you, we do 9 cities. And this slide here shows simply the 9 cities, where they are, and what are the different things that are happening. And this is the timeline of the important events that happened in each one of those cities. It's important to see that not all of them were developed at the same time and the same way. Even oil was explored in Kuwait earlier than in Qatar, for example. So the impact of the economy changed there earlier rather than later. So having said all this, we proceed with this research. We are all very excited. It's a big team, as I told you, and we learn really a lot of things. The most difficult thing is for us to keep our focus on the past and not be actually driven by start analyzing what happens right now, because this is the past. But it's not a historic research. It's the past in order to understand the present and the future. I want to emphasize that. We're not historians. Not a single person there is a historian other than the local people in Qatar who help us. And this is how we're going to, this is the timelines. I show these timelines because this is run very professionally, like a project that you assume the design and construction or the development in order to make things happen at the same time. The big difference is that we don't know exactly where we go, and things are changing, and we have to be open-minded. Very many times as I lead the team and I say we change the course of action, we're going to do something different, it creates some turmoil among those in us who are a little more, I would say they think more straight as opposed to thinking out of the box. But even yesterday, I had to make a decision like this because I saw the research was not going the proper way, the way it was going. So I still believe I have a few minutes, Chris, is that correct? Couple of minutes. So let me tell you about another project. So that is concluded. This other project is about, as you can see here, the rating system for sustainable infrastructure. This morning, it was mentioned by Professor Thomas that we need to have a system to measure sustainability. 3 years ago, we were the pioneers at the School of Design to be contracted to do a rating system, which I have to report to you that 3 years later, it is by far the most interesting, and it's going to be adopted by the American Society of Civil Engineers, among others, in order to be applied for sustainable infrastructure. The key here is that it's not enough to look at buildings. We have to look at the infrastructure systems, and this is where sustainability counts much more because these are so much bigger systems. So again, this is the goal of our program. These are photographs from different meetings. You can see that I pay attention to people all the time. And our mission is to promote the development, distribution, and adaptation of sustainable development methods and tools that define and quantify sustainability in the context of infrastructure and large-scale developments. The core team that I lead as well, and then the Infrastructure Advisory Board members. Here we do not have local architects. However, we have the participation of the largest engineering firms in the United States. Actually, as mentioned once, 75% of the billing of all engineering in the world is being represented by our members. And of course, this is not difficult if you see these big players we have here from some of the companies, as you can see, Stantec, HNTB, and so on. So, and this is the faculty members from all over Harvard, and then the many researchers. What are we doing here? We look at the infrastructure as having 6 different components, which is energy, water, waste, transportation, landscape, and information technology. And we look at these 6 categories and how we can make them more sustainable. And in order to do that, we have identified 4 areas. This is our framework. And the 4 areas is, we look at resources, and especially materials, energy, and water. We look at the climate change, and especially emissions, how to reduce climate change, and at the same time, how to adapt the projects for the future. We look at the natural world, and that has to do with the site selection and the habitat and the mitigation on as we do the site selection. And finally, health, quality of life, which is health, education, and community values. The reason we break this in 4 parts is because many of these are contradictory one to each other. And we believe the whole process is political, of sustainability, and eventually someone has to pay attention. Do we pay more attention to the natural world or to quality of life for people? Because sometimes they go together, but sometimes they contradict each other. Or do we pay more attention to resources or to quality of life? And then, out of these 4 areas, we have these 4 categories. We have 70 credits. The credits are ready to be used. We have not tested it yet. We start the big testing with the American Society of Civil Engineers. And I believe this would be also very good material to base what you are doing here in the Bahamas as well, although we have not applied in such a beautiful natural environment yet. And I think this is my last slide, so that was Russ. Again, the objective of my talk was more to talk about research that happens right now at the School of Design. It's extensive. It's expensive, I have to say, because we have very many people, and we're able to do it because we have really very, very good people. Actually, all the money goes almost to salaries, and I have the best thing to say for our faculty and our students. To tell the truth, I do very little. I'm like the conductor in the orchestra, nothing else. They do all the thinking. Very good. So thank you very much.